When we think of primitive people, we usually imagine them in daylight, hunters, gatherers, toolmakers. But what happened when night fell? When the sun went down and the world was plunged into darkness, the lives of ancient people changed dramatically. Night was not only a time for rest, but also for completely different activities that you might not even have imagined. The night hours dictated their own rules, transforming everyday life into something completely different. Watch the video to the end to find out how the nightlife of primitive people was filled with completely unexpected activities that still influence us today. The campfire was the heart of the primitive camp, especially at night. It not only provided warmth, but also protection. The darkness of night was full of dangers, and fire was the only reliable barrier. Therefore, one of the most important nighttime activities was keeping the fire going. It was not just a routine, but a vital task that required constant attention. Ancient people took turns standing guard at the fire, throwing branches on it and making sure the flames did not go out. This process was not just physical work, but part of social life. People gathered around the fire to chat, share news, or simply sit in silence. It was a time to strengthen bonds within the group. Night watches were a test of endurance and responsibility, and every member of the group, from the most experienced to the newest, had to contribute. Keeping the fire going had not only practical but also symbolic significance. It was a source of life and safety. Extinguishing the fire at night was tantamount to suicide, as it left the group vulnerable to predators and enemies. Therefore, everyone who was on night watch felt a great responsibility for the fate of the entire group. It was not just a fire, but a living creature that needed to be fed and protected. The night watch was a kind of ritual that was repeated night after night. It was part of the culture and traditions. People passed down their knowledge of how to properly add branches and maintain the flame from generation to generation. It was a kind of art that required patience and skill. Life around the fire was also a place for creativity. By the light of the fire, people could create rock paintings and carve figures out of wood or bone. It was a time when they could express their thoughts and feelings. Night was the perfect time for creativity, as there were no distractions. Now think about which of these tasks would be the most difficult for you. Keeping the fire going all night or standing guard duty? Share your thoughts in the comments. When the lights went out and silence fell, ancient people had the opportunity to pass on their knowledge. By the light of the fire, they told stories about past hunts, mythical creatures, and their ancestors. These stories were not just entertainment, but a way to preserve and pass on information from generation to generation. Oral traditions were the only source of knowledge, and night was the perfect time to pass them on. People listened to stories about how to make tools, how to find food, and how to navigate the forest. It was a kind of university where knowledge was passed down from mouth to mouth. Storytellers had a special status in the group because they were the keepers of knowledge and traditions. Night gatherings around the campfire were not just get-togethers, but important social events that strengthened the unity of the group. Storytelling was a key element of survival. Through stories, they shared their experiences, how to avoid danger, which plants were edible and which were not, how to sharpen an axe. This knowledge helped them survive and adapt to changing conditions. The better the stories, the better the knowledge was remembered. Nighttime conversations helped develop thinking and imagination. By listening to stories about mythical creatures, people learned to think abstractly and use their imagination. This was important for brain development. They imagined things they couldn't see, which helped them come up with new strategies for hunting or survival. Night was the perfect time for creativity. By the light of the fire, they could not only tell stories but also create new works of art. Rock paintings, bone and wood figurines. It was a form of self-expression that helped them cope with stress and fear of the unknown. Oral traditions were the only form of culture. They were alive and constantly changing. Each storyteller could add something of their own, which made the stories more interesting and exciting. It was a kind of collective creativity that helped them preserve their traditions and history. Now think about it. If everything we know was passed down only by word of mouth, how would our lives be different? Would we still believe in myths about giants who live in our dreams? Let's talk more about dreams later. The dreams of ancient people were different from ours. They probably did not sleep all night long, but divided their sleep into several periods. This is called polyphasic sleep. This pattern allowed them to always be alert and ready for any danger. For example, one member of the group could sleep while another stayed awake and kept the fire going. Ancient people slept on animal skins, which served as their beds. Depending on the climate, they could cover themselves with additional skins. The place to sleep was chosen carefully to be as safe as possible. They slept close to each other to keep warm and feel more protected. This was a time when they were most vulnerable, so they had to trust each other. Polyphasic sleep was a key element of survival in the wild. Unlike us, ancient people could not afford to sleep for 8 hours straight. The night was full of dangers, predators, hostile tribes, unpredictable weather conditions. Therefore, they slept in short bursts, alternating between sleep and vigilance. This allowed them to always be ready for any threat. This sleep pattern was a kind of natural alarm system that helped them survive. The place to sleep was chosen strategically. It had to be as protected as possible from the wind and cold. Ancient people often slept in caves or under rock overhangs, which provided additional protection. They could also build temporary shelters out of branches and leaves. Inside such shelters, they felt safer. Sleep was not just rest, but a way to restore strength. It helped them replenish the energy spent on hunting and gathering. During sleep, the body could recover and prepare for new challenges. It was a kind of reboot that allowed them to be strong and resilient. Trust was the foundation of nighttime sleep. When one person slept, they completely trusted the other who was awake. It was a kind of agreement that helped them survive. Without this trust, they could not feel safe. Sleeping in a group was not only a way to keep warm, but also a way to show that you trusted each other. In addition to storytelling, night was the perfect time to prepare for the next day. While everyone else rested, the most experienced members of the group sharpened their weapons and made new tools. By the light of the fire, they could work with stone, bone, and wood. It was painstaking work that required patience and skill. The men could sharpen spears and arrows, while the women could create new tools for processing hides or preparing food. This was a time when they could focus on details that were not visible during the day. Night work was a kind of meditation that allowed them to calm down and prepare for the new day. Nighttime crafts were a vital part of life. The night, free from the noise and bustle of the day, provided an opportunity for concentrated work. Experienced craftsmen could carve spearheads, make knife blades, and scrape hides. By the light of the fire, they could see the smallest cracks and defects in the stone, allowing them to create higher quality tools. Each tool made at night was a work of art that could save a life. Making tools was not only a practical task, but also a way of passing on knowledge. Experienced craftsmen could teach novices how to work stone and wood properly. They passed on their secrets and skills, which had been accumulated over many generations. It was a kind of craft school that operated at night when everyone else was asleep. Working at night strengthened social ties. While some worked, others could watch, learn, or simply socialize. It was a time for sharing experiences and knowledge. Nighttime activities were an important element of social organization. They helped people feel part of a whole and realize that they were working together for the common good. Our ancestors faced various difficult questions, such as, they found the largest and most delicious fruit, but it only grows at night. What to do? Wait until morning or go after it in the dark? We will talk about this later. Keep watching. Night hunting was a dangerous but necessary activity. Some animals were only active at night, and hunting them was more effective. Ancient people used bonfires and torches to blind animals and sneak up on them unnoticed. It was a tactic that required courage and agility. At night, people also gathered plants that were only available in the dark. These included mushrooms, berries, and roots that grew in specific places. Night gathering was a kind of adventure that required courage and knowledge. Night hunting was a strategic advantage. Many of the animals hunted by ancient people had poorer night vision than humans. By using fire to blind and disorient their prey, hunters gained a significant advantage. They could get closer and strike more accurately. This not only increased their chances of success, but also reduced the risk to the hunters themselves. Such expeditions required excellent knowledge of the terrain and coordinated teamwork. Gathering at night was no less important. Some edible plants or mushrooms could be more visible in the dark or only appear at night. Ancient people knew these characteristics and used them to their advantage. For example, they could gather certain types of mushrooms that glowed in the dark. This was a kind of secret way of obtaining food that was available only to the most experienced and knowledgeable members of the group. Nighttime foraging expeditions were not as dangerous as hunting, but they still required caution and vigilance. Nighttime activities, whether hunting or gathering, required a high level of discipline from ancient people. They had to know when and how to act so as not to endanger themselves and the whole group. It was a kind of survival school that taught them to be cautious, attentive, and responsible. These activities also helped them to better understand nature and its laws. They studied the behavior of animals and plants, which was vital for their survival. Night was not just a time for rest, but a time for active work that bore fruit. It was full of opportunities and dangers, and only the bravest and most intelligent could survive it. In addition to keeping the fire going, one of the most important nighttime tasks was guarding the territory. Guards were on duty to scare away predators and hostile tribes. They patrolled the camp, looking out for any danger. This work was very important, as the safety of the entire group depended on it. The guards were the most experienced and strongest members of the group. They knew the area and were skilled at recognizing tracks and sounds. Their work was intense and required constant vigilance. At night, they were the only protection for their fellow tribesmen. Night watch duty was incredibly difficult. In the dark, when visibility was limited, they had to rely on their hearing and sense of smell. Every rustle, every crack of a branch could be a sign of danger. The guards had to be not only strong, but also intelligent, to distinguish the natural sounds of nature from the sounds made by predators or enemies. It was a job that required complete immersion and concentration. Night duty was a kind of ritual that was repeated night after night. It was part of the culture and traditions. People passed down their knowledge of how to correctly recognize sounds and how to act in case of danger from generation to generation. It was a kind of art that required patience and skill. The guards were not just security guards, but defenders who had to be ready for any danger. Their work was no less important than that of hunters or gatherers. The safety of the entire group depended on them, and they had to be ready to sacrifice themselves for others. It was a kind of obligation they had to their group. In the end, night watch duty was one of the most important and difficult tasks. It required courage, strength, and intelligence. Without it, no tribe could survive. But what was more difficult? Tracking prey during the day or standing night watch duty. Watch the video to the end to find out the answer to this question. Night was a time for communication that was different from daytime. In the darkness, people could be more open and honest. They could discuss personal problems and share their thoughts and feelings. It was a time to strengthen personal bonds. Rituals and ceremonies were also held at night. These could be related to the worship of fire, ancestral spirits, or the stars. These rituals were important for the spiritual life of the group. They helped them feel part of something bigger and gave them hope. Spiritual practices and rituals were an integral part of nightlife. When the cares of the day faded into the background, it was time for reflection and turning to higher powers. Around the campfire under the starry sky, people felt a special connection with nature and the cosmos. They could perform rituals related to hunting to get the spirit's blessing and ensure good luck for the next day. These rituals weren't just beliefs, but a way to deal with the fear of the unknown and gain confidence in their abilities. Rituals also helped maintain social order and group unity. They brought people together by creating shared values and traditions. Each member of the group knew their place and role in the ritual. It was a kind of collective action that helped them feel part of a larger whole. Rituals were not just traditions, but a living language that spoke of unity, strength, and hope. Nighttime communication was an important part of social life. People could discuss plans for the future, share their dreams, and talk about their fears. It was a time when they could be more vulnerable and open with each other. This helped them understand each other better and strengthen their relationships. Nighttime conversations around the campfire were a kind of psychological aid that helped them cope with stress and pressure. All of this suggests that night was not just a time for rest, but a time for spiritual and social growth. It was filled with rituals, communication, and reflection. It was a time when ancient people could find meaning in their lives and feel part of something bigger. When everyone was asleep, some members of the group could engage in creative activities. They could create rock paintings or carve figures out of bone or wood. Night was the perfect time for creativity, as there were no distractions. Creativity was not just entertainment, but a way of self-expression and knowledge transfer. The rock paintings we find today were probably created at night by the light of a campfire. They depicted scenes of hunting, animals, and mythical creatures. These paintings were a kind of diary that told the story of the lives of ancient people. Nighttime creativity was not only a personal activity, but also a collective one. Creating rock paintings was often a group effort where everyone could contribute. One person might draw the outline of an animal, another might color it in, and a third might add details. It was a kind of collective meditation that helped them cope with the stresses and fears of the day. Creativity was a way of passing on knowledge and culture. Rock paintings were not just beautiful images, but a kind of textbook that taught how to hunt, how to cook food, and how to live in harmony with nature. They were a kind of map that showed where to find food and shelter. These drawings were a living language that spoke of the past and the present. Nighttime creativity was a form of self-expression. It allowed people to express thoughts and feelings that they could not put into words. It was a kind of diary that told the story of their lives. It was a way to cope with the fear of the unknown and find meaning in their lives. Making figures out of bone and wood was also an important activity. These figures could be talismans that brought good luck on the hunt or symbols that showed a person's status in the tribe. They were works of art created with love and attention. It was a form of self-expression that helped them feel better and more confident. At night, ancient people interacted with their environment in a different way. They studied the stars and observed the movement of the planets. This helped them orient themselves in space and time. They created their own maps of the starry sky and used them for navigation. They also observed animals and their behavior. This helped them better understand nature and prepare for the next day's hunt. Nighttime observations were an important part of their lives. Nighttime stargazing was not just a hobby, but a vital science. Ancient people used the stars as a kind of map to help them navigate. They knew where the North Star was and how to find the constellations. This knowledge allowed them to move around at night and not get lost. The stars were their GPS navigation system. They could also use the stars to determine the time of day and the season. This was important for planning hunts and gathering. Observing animals at night was an important part of survival. Many animals were active at night, and watching them provided important information about their behavior. People could find out where they slept, where they ate, and where they drank. This helped them to better prepare for the next day's hunt. They could also observe the behavior of predators to avoid danger. Nighttime observations were a way of learning about the world. Ancient people did not have books or the internet, so they learned by observing nature. They studied the stars, animals, and plants. It was a kind of science that helped them survive and adapt to changing conditions. All this suggests that ancient people were not just primitive creatures, but intelligent and curious. They sought to understand the world they lived in and used their knowledge to survive. Nighttime observations were an important part of their lives that helped them succeed. Despite all the nighttime activities, night was a time for rest. It was a time when people could recover from a hard day. They slept to prepare for new challenges. Rest was important for survival, as without it, people would not have been able to withstand the strain. Sleep was not just rest, but a way to recover. It helped them regain their strength, strengthen their immune system, and prepare for a new day. Night was a time to recover so that they could go hunting again the next day. In addition to restoring physical strength, sleep also played a key role in mental and psychological health. During sleep, the brain processed the information received during the day. It organized memories, learned from mistakes, and prepared for new tasks. Sleep was a kind of reset for the brain, allowing it to work more efficiently. Without this process, ancient humans would not have been able to come up with new strategies, create complex tools, or communicate with each other. Sleep was also important for strengthening the immune system. During sleep, the body restored its defenses. This helped them fight disease and infection. In an environment where there were no medicines or antibiotics, a strong immune system was vital. Sleep was a kind of natural medicine that helped them survive. Ancient people knew how important it was to sleep safely. They chose the most protected places in caves or under rock overhangs to sleep. They also slept close to each other to feel more protected. It was a kind of collective sleep that helped them feel safe. In the end, night was not only a time for rest, but also a time for recovery. It was vital for physical and mental health. It was a kind of recharge that helped them stay strong, resilient, and ready for new challenges. We have looked at what ancient people actually did at night and seen that their lives were much more complex and interesting than we might think. They did not just sleep, but worked, socialized, created, and learned. Their nightlife was just as important as their daytime activities. They were not only hunters and gatherers, but also philosophers, artists, and astronomers. They were intelligent and inventive, and their lives were full of meaning. If you have any ideas for new videos, such as what the first cities looked like, or how ancient people domesticated fire, please write them in the comments. We will be happy to consider all your suggestions. If you like this video and want to see more like it, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. See you next time.